Everyone, I
Yeah,
welcome
hi.
you to the 11th JGLS Alumni webinar. Topic of arbitrary hybrid approach to Shireen Moti, Professor Director of Alumni Relations at Jindal OP Jindal University. Jindal Global University started in 2009, leadership of our Chancellor Jindal, Vice Chancellor Professor Dr. Raj. Over OP Jindal Global University has been recognized as an institute of excellence India, and Jindal School has been ranked #1 law school in India by CUNY rankings. With this, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Anjali Chawla. Ms. graduated with a BA LLB honors degree in Global Law School, Jindal Global University in the year 2020. Ms. Chawla has experience of working as a law clerk for Justice G.S. Sistani, the High Court of Delhi. She has the varied experience of matters related to arbitration, civil and commercial litigation. She has also worked as a research assistant in economic trade. She is an advocate and is currently pursuing a law degree in international commercial law from Stockholm University. She holds the view that there is growing discomfort amongst investors to take recourse to litigation for resolving complex commercial disputes due to high stakes, lack of procedural flexibility, high costs, and delays are some of the reasons that cause discomfort amongst investors. During this session, Ms. Anjali will discuss the possible arbitration effective method to resolving legal disputes as opposed to litigation. With this, I am really honored and privileged to have Anjali join us here today. And I would like to introduce a question where I ask an introductory comment on the question that when, how did you decide that you study law? Welcome, Anjali.
Yeah, hi, Shireen. Thank you so much for the introduction. Your voice is breaking a bit for me, so it's really difficult for me to catch up with what you're saying. So,
Okay. So the question is trying to ask that when did you decide to study law?
yeah, it's really funny because I never thought that I will end up doing law. In fact, it was never in my card. I wanted to do blueprint architecturing. And but it all started with my father, so everything which we used to discuss, it was more or less like a roundtable conference for us because we'll end up negotiating for things. And I remember it was Women's Day, and there was a front page news on women empowerment, and it spoke about women in law. And my dad was like, why don't you want to give it a try? And I just read that article and I was like, sure, I can actually look into it. And then, like, rest is history, and I just don't know when I entered the law school and all this thing happened. And I'm as of today, I'm really happy that I did law, because now it feels that this is something which I wanted to do always in my life.
That's brilliant to hear. So, also to follow up the question, the experience you had in the classroom, what was that whole experience like?
Yeah. So, my experience of Jindal, it's so difficult for me to put into words, and I'm just not saying it for the sake of it. I truly mean it. Uh, I've always been the product of Jindal. Like since my seventh grade, I've been into their schools, and I think they have a very huge role in my life to play. Because Jindal, it's a whole experience. It's just not about classrooms, the kind of professors we had, the kind of infrastructures, and moreover the friends which we have got. I'm like, honestly, in the beginning it sounded absurd to me that why even a localite has to stay in a hostel and to have this whole experience. But now today it makes much more sense to me because we grew as a community together. Like your life does not, like being in a legal background also, you're just not stick to the classroom. You're much more than that. Your whole personality actually depends on the people around you, how they influence you. And yeah, I'm truly blessed to be part of Jindal. And this is something I thank every day, because they have actually given us the chances to grow, and they have given us the play field. Um, During my college also, I had an idea how to survive in this world. And being a first generation lawyer with no backing at all, I'm really thankful that I chose Jindal as my choice for law.
Hi, Anjali, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Now I can.
Oh, perfect. I think with the to the attendees, you
Okay.
an of international arbitration by school, or was that something you got in after you graduated?
Okay, so I actually never thought about arbitration. I always wanted to do taxation. In fact, during my law school, I joined centers which was related to taxation. I did all my electives in taxation, and I also did like 2 years TA-ship with Professor Gagan Kotra in taxation. So I never thought of it. In my fourth year, I definitely read about arbitration, and it was a nice subject, but that was about it. But it's really funny like how people around me always thought that I should do arbitration except me. Like I remember I took an elective in first year competency mapping, and Dr. Sahani actually told me, Anjali, you will make a good career in arbitration. And I had no idea about arbitration back then. I was just in my first year. Then my dad also told me about this thing, and I was like, why people keep on telling me that? But when I joined Justice Sistani, he just shifted recently from criminal to civil at that time when I joined him. Now he's retired, and we got arbitration as a roster. And then I started reading about it, and like it was so much fun every day because we were growing immensely in the field of arbitration every day, and there were a lot of things that we still had loopholes in it. So I would read about different jurisdictions like Singapore, UK, France, and like the more I read about it, the more interest I inculcated. And that time, Justice Nariman was also giving arbitration judgments every second day. So I think because of the situations and my interest, like it all started from there. And that's when I decided to do my master's in commercial arbitration. But I again faced the dilemma of doing whether a general LLM with a master's elective or to do a specialization. And I actually had a lot of offers in my hand for arbitration. I was supposed to go to NYU for my arbitration course. But then when I researched more about Stockholm University, and I saw that it's a super specialization because my course is international commercial arbitration. So that's when I decided, yeah, this is something I really want to do. And that's how I tuned into this LLM program. And yeah, I'm graduated, just waiting for my degree to come. Yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi. I think I got disconnected. So you're able to hear
Um,
me now? I'm so sorry.
yeah,
So my
I
question
can.
to you was that what is so you have done your LLM from a foreign university. How different was that experience from pursuing an LLM from pursuing
I believe your question is how it's different from pursuing in India. Okay, Shireen, I think I can't hear you. Yeah, okay. I think it's not much of the difference for me per se because Jindal is pretty much international and it gives you international exposure. But yeah, if students go from India to do masters abroad, a lot big starting with the culture because especially when we are common law countries and I'm coming to a civil law background. So the writing style, like in India, we are used to write in lengths and we really write wrong judgments. In foreign people like things which are short and crisp, so they don't have that lengthy judgments. Like in fact, even if I talk about any Supreme Court landmark experience, they just like it's really difficult for them to wrap their head around because our judgments flow in hundred of the pages. So writing style is different, and then culture wise also a lot of things are different. I think coming from India, we are workaholic, so we work on weekends and weekend without any time. This thing, but people in foreign, they respect when people maintain a proper balance in their work life. So Monday to Friday they work so efficiently, and Saturday Sunday you can't even send an email to somebody; it's considered rude. So that took me some time to realize it, and then to make myself like, okay, Monday to Friday I'm going to talk to people, and then Saturday Sunday I'm not going to bother anybody. So I don't even write anyone on LinkedIn also on weekends because I think like I don't know like if it's like correct thing to do
that's
or
a
not. Yeah, and I think coming to foreign, the best part is if you want to pursue your career in laws like international law, it's a really good bonding because you meet a lot of people, especially in Europe, because Europe is a part of like Stockholm is a part of Schengen area. So I have 28 countries, so I can freely move to any other country, attend webinars, courses, or 0 days with the uh, firms and everyone. Now everything is online thanks to pandemic, but it was easy to network, I think, in Europe for me, which was also really nice because you get to meet a lot of people, learn from them. Like I read about all these professors in my international law and I got a chance to meet them, so it was really refreshing. The best part about masters, I think, is your classroom because my classroom is just 25 people, but they are from 19 jurisdictions. So I learned a lot during my 10 months in the course because everyone had such a nice experience. Like I have classmates with 10 years of experience, 12 years of experience. So it was really overwhelming to understand about their background, where they're coming from. And yeah, we learned a lot. Can't complain.
seems like you had a lot of fun and did a lot of professional networking as well as honed your research and writing skills. The last question in terms of introduction that I would like to ask you is that what are you most looking forward to in your professional journey ahead?
Uh, yeah, so I think for me personally, although I'm doing international law, but it's really important to give back to the society what you have got. So I want to begin with, I really want to work with any international firm right now. Like I have few in my mind, which will be amazing if it gets through, because it's really difficult during pandemic to work with them because people are already laying off. I actually had an offer which just recently got rescinded because of COVID, but then I'm looking for more. To begin with, I really want to work and understand their culture. So what I have learned in theory, I want to put that in practice. Although I had a lot of mock trials and negotiations in the law firm, and I went to a lot of law firms during my master's, but working full time is a completely different scenario. And then eventually I would want to come back to India to take my practice over there, and at the same time I would really want to continue with my pro bono work. I'm actually doing some and I've been doing it, but I want to continue it like in a full-fledged manner. And
That sounds
actually,
very.
yeah, and actually, you know about it. Some of us have actually started JGU COVID Fund Relief, and it's been a month. We have the savings of almost 4 lakh rupees, and we have helped almost 9,000 migrant workers. So it's going great. And thank you to you as well. I saw you promoted us on the emails and you let everyone else know about us. So it was very helpful. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, more of it.
Yes, and so great. And I hope you reach more and more people, and something that is of utmost importance at this point. So now, a word to the attendees. Anjali will be taking us through a presentation for the next 40 minutes through a PPT. I'm very much sure, but I'm in the background. Meanwhile, you can send your questions in the questions box on your screens. And after the presentation, Anjali would be happy to answer your questions. Over to you, Anjali. You can share your
Thank you
screen.
so much. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to, I made a small presentation for everybody. So I'm going to take you through. And if you have any doubts and any questions, just let me know. Just stop me in between. Uh, oh, I hope you can see my presentation. Anka, can you confirm? Is it up?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I'm going to talk about something called MedArb or ARB-Med, which is mediation and arbitration. And arbitration and mediation, it's basically a hybrid where we combine two or more than two dispute resolution together. I'm just going to focus on mediation and arbitration. Some people call it a multi-tier dispute resolution clause as well, because there are different layers to it. One is arbitration, another is mediation. Some people call it escalation clauses because it escalate your dispute, and some people call it hybrid clauses as well because it's a hybrid, it's a mixture of two. So yeah, so I'm going to start with the my favorite example and also the most popular example of dispute resolution clause. It's about the oranges. I'm sure most of you must have heard about it, but it's a good start for those of you who does not know about it. So it's actually an example which was discussed in Harvard Law School many years back, and it's a popular example in dispute resolution now. So it's a story about two children who were fighting for an last orange which was in the fridge, and the mother saw these kids fighting over an orange, and she asked these kids, why are you fighting? And they told the mother that it's about the orange. So without asking anything, the mother cut the orange into two parts, gave one part to one kid and one part to another kid. After some time, she realized that one kid actually took the pulp out, made a juice of it, and threw the shedding of the orange, and she saw the other kid threw the orange out and used the shedding for the cake. Now, this story can be looked from different aspects. I'm going to talk about the positional bargaining. So how it all starts, whenever there's a dispute, the parties establish their positions. They say that I want X thing and I want Y thing. And they don't ask each other anything, and they just aim to win. So that's a primitive approach as well, like where you go with your position, you say something, and then you get 50-50% of it, and then you leave. Now, at times, people are satisfied that 50-50% deal, like the kids, because half orange was enough for them to make a juice and half orange was enough for the other kid to use in the cake. But what happens if the kid who made a juice out of it was not satisfied with the half glass and wanted a full glass? Or if the cake was big enough for the kid to cover with just a half orange and wanted more orange to make it tasty, then what do you do? Then in that scenario, the interest would have been maximized to 100% if the mother would have opened a dialogue, if she would have asked them, what do you want? That is called interest-based negotiation, where you open a dialogue and try and ask parties what do they actually want. You understand their position and then create a win-win situation for them. So if mother would have asked, she would have easily distributed one orange to one kid and the shedding to another kid, and both of them would have been 100% satisfied. So that's where med-arb come into the picture, because whenever there is a commercial dispute, the parties always, the first reflex is, okay, the contract say arbitration, dispute resolution, let's go to dispute resolution tribunal. Let's just move on notice and then start dispute resolution. But what they don't understand is that if they look little outside the box of arbitration and see the alternates which are available to them, they can actually satisfy them. Because although in theory arbitration is supposed to be time and money saving, but I'm afraid that in practice it's not the real scenario. Arbitration does require a lot of time, and it also requires a lot of money. So if we can talk to the parties and understand their position and see if the circumstances allow it, if the dispute is not that complex, if it's a simple dispute, then the same dispute can be mitigated through mediation instead of going for an arbitration. In that scenario, if the dispute is taken by mediation, it would not only save time and money to the party, but it would also help them to build a bigger relationship. Because although the commercial market looks very big, but honestly it's not. There are very few actors in commercial market and the reputation can get tarnished. So if today you are in dispute with the X company, tomorrow if you're going to make a deal with the Y company, they will look at your past details. That's what due diligence is about. And even if you say that you were not the one who created a mischief, it's a human tendency to think that one person cannot make 100% mistake. Of course, you would have contributed in that 20% or 30%. So even your reputation is at stake. And also, if you have a very good relation with the party, and just because of a minor dispute, you are giving away your next 10 years of business relationship, that's also not a smart thing to do. So that's where med-arb or arb-med come to the rescue, that you put a hold on your arbitration and go to mediation and try and find the alternate remedies. Now, how does multi-tier dispute resolution clause happen? How does med-arb work? So there are two modes of it. Okay, there is one mode where you are doing an arbitration and the arbitrator, or in litigation when you are moving the notice for arbitration, the judge tells them that, okay, why don't you go for an mediation? And then parties, if they think it's okay for them to go, they can go about it also. But that's a very rare situation. Generally, how it happens that parties draft these dispute resolution clauses. And how do you draft it? You can draft it in two manner. One is your ADR clause, which is a part of your contract, which is about the future dispute, because you design an ADR clause when at the time of designing your contract. And the other one is submission agreement. So submission agreement is when parties do not have an arbitration clause and they draft an arbitration agreement once the dispute has occurred. So ADR clause deals with the future disputes and submission agreements deals with the present disputes. And submission agreement is also, it's similar to your opening statement because it's much wider. You tell about your dispute, what are your grievances, and what do you want. So you give a bigger picture in submission agreement, which is why a lot of people prefer submission agreement also on above ADR clauses. And what are the methods of going about med-arb? The first standard method is that first you go for mediation, and then if the mediation fails, then you go to the arbitration. And even if the mediation succeed, people still go to arbitration. And the reason is that mediation is not final and binding, but arbitration is final and binding. So people make a settlement during mediation and they record that settlement in the terms of an award, which is also called a consent award, so that in future, if one of the parties move back from their original position, this award binds them so that the other party does not face any problem in the future. So going to arbitration after mediation is a kind of making a secure policy for the parties. The second option is arb-med-arb, which is again like people are going to arbitration, and if in arbitration at some point of the time they think that the award which is going to come is not going to benefit any of the party, or it's going to less benefit them, and they can make like crack a better deal in discussion, so then they will pause arbitration and go to mediation. Or if they think that the dispute is simple and can be dealt with mediation and we can save a lot of money and time, then they pause onto their arbitration, go to mediation, decide. If they are succeeded what they have apprehended, that we can do that thing. If they are able to succeed, then they come back and record it, and if it fails, then eventually they come back and they continue adjudication under arbitration. These are two main techniques, methods which people generally use in ADR, but there's a third one which is called the envelope technique. So what happens in this technique is the arbitrator listens to both the parties adjudicates their claim, and once the arbitrator is ready with the award, he drafts the award, or the tribunal drafts the award and seal it in an envelope. And before opening the envelope, they give one last chance to the parties and ask whether the parties would like to go for with an award or they would like to mediate. If the parties choose mediation at that point of time, then the arbitrator tarnish that award in front of the parties. And if the parties says otherwise, then the envelope is opened and the arbitration award, which has been drafted, pre-drafted, it becomes binding on the parties. Now, how these methods take place, it can happen through a same neutral party also, and as well as different neutral party as well. So same neutral party, I mean, there is a mediator, there's a third party who is acting as a mediator. Once the mediation fails, the party then steps into the shoes of an arbitrator and takes the case from there. Now, the positive point of having same party for mediation and arbitration is that you will save a lot of time, since the arbitrator or the third party already know about your case. But the negative point is, although these mediation and arbitration both are confidential, but still we all are human and there's a human tendency to get inspired by your thoughts. So if in mediation something was disclosed to the third party, which you would have not disclosed to the arbitrator, in that case it can act against you. So that is the problem and the positive point of the having the same neutral party. But the people can also have different neutral party, which means you go to first mediation, and if the mediation fails, the third party of mediation exit the case, it ceases to exist, and then you form a arbitral tribunal and continue with your arbitration from there. Now, although we all know the basic difference between what is mediation and what is arbitration, this is binding, that's not binding, this is final, that's not final. But one important thing that we need to understand is that mediation is interest driven and arbitration is right driven. So in mediation, it does not matter whether you are right or some person is wrong. It's not black and white. Uh, Mediation is about the step that we acknowledge that the terms are not favorable, that we acknowledge that dispute has occurred. Now what? So that question is asked in mediation. It's about the interest. I know that you were not at fault, somebody else was at fault, but you are in the problem right now. So what do you want? What is your main interest? Is money your main concern? Reputation your main concern? Or taking this contract is your main concern? What is your main concern? And then maybe you say that at this point of time, money is important to you. And there's another player, another company which is much more powerful than you, who does not care about money, but care about the reputation. So they'll be like, public apology is important for me. So now the mediator know, okay, money is important for you, public apology is important for you. So then the mediator would let you meet, and then would be like, okay, you pay the money and you give the public apology. That's mediation, where we do not drive into the question of who is right or who is wrong. We just look at the interest of the parties and then we decide accordingly. Whereas in arbitration, it's right driven, where you see, okay, whose mistake was it, who did wrong, because of who's wrong, who suffered the losses. So that's right driven, that your right was to get this consignment on time. You have not, so now you will get the money. Your right was that you will get confirmation. You didn't get it, so now they'll apologize. So that's right driven. But now some of you would ask me that if one is interest driven and one is right driven, then how do we combine them and why do we combine them? That is because the complexity of the commercial contract. Commercial contracts are not that easy how it looks in the book, that one company had this problem, another company had this problem. There are different layers to it, because For example, concession contract. Concession contracts are anyway like tender contracts. And let's take an example of Airport Authority of India. Now, Airport Authority of India has given you uh, to build Terminal 1 for X airport, and now you're working for it. And usually these concession contracts have terms where you have to take permission of your designs from the engineers, which are appointed by these airport authority. So now you send all your drawings to the engineer, and then engineer takes, let's say, 1 year. Yeah, I'm not exaggerating. There are times when people actually take months and years to get back to you. And the moment you got back your drawings, the workers went on the strike. And now, so it's not your fault per se that all these things happen in the series, but things happens like that. But it's not Airport Authority of India's fault as well, because they gave you a contract, let's say, for 5 years, but you couldn't complete it. So for them it is uh, their loss, and for you also it's your loss, because you didn't do anything wrong per se, but things happen, one thing happened to another thing, and you cannot go to the court and say that, you know, these things happen, so you should give me a reduction or just let me go off the hook, because then court will ask you the question, or the tribunal will ask you the question, that these things could have been foreseen by you. I mean, workers going on a strike and things reaching you late happens in general parlance, especially when you are involved with the government authorities and when you are in countries like ours. So then what do you do? Now the question is just not about who is right or who is wrong and who has suffered losses, because in actuality, both of you are right on your situation and both of you have suffered the losses. So then how do you deal with this situation? Then you keep your differences aside. Instead of suing each other, going to arbitration, you take all these things to one corner, which is mediation, and you discuss about it. So which is why, although arbitration is right driven, and although complex contract need these right, but at the same time they also need to look into the interest of the parties, which is exactly why we combine mediation and arbitration together. So these are the few benefits of MedArb. One is confidentiality, that both mediation and arbitration is confidential. Another is the flexibility, because party autonomy, I mean, like the choice of the party is the biggest thing in ADR. So basically it's you, the parties, who design the whole curriculum for yourself, that how do you want to take this dispute, how you want to solve this thing. So a lot of flexibility is given to the parties, which is not given in the litigation. Then MedArb also act as a filtration process, as I explained, that all the complex dispute can also have few underlying simple principles. So how you do it, if you go to mediation before arbitration, and if you are able to solve, for example, you have 10 claims, and out of 10 claims, 3 claims were simple. So if you solve these 3 claims, then you come back to arbitration, because it's like partial mediation. So then you can tell the arbitrator that, okay, we have decided on these 3 points, but these 7 points are yet to be adjudicated. In that case, you have reduced your workload. So ultimately, you have reduced your time in the arbitrary tribunal. And also, it gives you some hope that the business with this party would still continue, because you somewhere made peace with them. So, which brings me to my next point, which is about the business relationship. It helps you to achieve longer and credible business relationship. Then economic consideration. Of course, arbitration is not cheap. It requires a lot of money, starting with the reading fees of the arbitrator, then the fees of the arbitral tribunal for listening to the case, your lawyers, your travel expense, the food expense, booking of the meeting rooms, everything, like anything and everything which people does, it goes to the ledger of the parties. So ultimately it leads to a huge money business. So which is why when we go to mediation, you cut short of your legal fees, you cut short of fees of the arbitrator. So ultimately it's much more economical thing for you, and also it's with reduced time. So which is why people should consider about MedArb. And the final thing is cooling off period. As we all know that a lot of disputes are derived because of the egos of the party. So when something wrong happens, we do not think rationally. Our only question is, my case is strong, I'm going to sue the other party and I'm going to get money out of it. So being a lawyer, it is our responsibility to first put some sense into them, telling them, no, it's not the case, that your case is strong. The other party also has a strong case. And second thing, when you give them time in mediation, they would be more relaxed, more reasonable while arguing. So even if mediation succeed during that cooling off period, then well and good. Even if mediation does not succeed, it makes your client much more stable because they have gotten that time to channelize and to see that, okay, now how do they want to go in arbitration? What do they want? So they'll be more subtle in their claims. But as we say that everything has a side effect, so there are few drawbacks also of med-art. One thing is your limitation period. Now, limitation ceases to exist when you put a claim in a courtroom or when you move a notice for your arbitration, but it does not happen at the time of mediation. So if you have a very limited limitation period in your hand and you have a right of arbitration, then you have to go for an arbitration, otherwise it ceases to exist. Now, Indian court and a lot of other courts throughout the international jurisdictions are of the opinion that if there is a mandatory clause which says that the parties have to go to mediation first and then arbitration, it cannot be done away with. So, if you have a mediation, you have to go for mediation because it was written in your contract. And if parties do not go for mediation and they go to the arbitral tribunal, the other party can raise this issue that there was a mediation that's supposed to happen. This party didn't do the mediation, and the tribunal in 99% of cases would say, since you have not gone for mediation, arbitration still remains premature because as per your contract, your first step was to go to mediation and you cannot jump to the second step. But if the limitation is in the question, if the parties can prove that they have limited limitation period, and if they go to mediation and do not stay in arbitration, then the limitation period would surpass, and that time the tribunal will take it into consideration because once the limitation period exceeds, your right also ceases to exist. So which is why if there is a limitation in question, you don't have to go to mediation, you can't go to mediation. Second thing is confidentiality issue, as I've mentioned earlier. Now, confidentiality over here is a two-way road. One, confidentiality on the part of neutral party. So if one neutral party is acting as a mediator and then arbitrator, there might be confidentiality issues despite a written confidentiality. There still would be because in your mind you still have preconceived notions. Another confidentiality issue arises with the parties because if suppose I'm one party and you are another party and we are into mediation, we we are at the position of bargaining now. So at the time of bargaining, people tell each other information which they would have not disclosed in an arbitration. Although I'm not allowed as per the confidentiality to use this information against you in arbitration directly, but that does not mean that I will not use it against you indirectly. I would still find a way to use it against you. So that is the problem with med-art, the confidentiality. Third thing is flawed intentions, because if the other party is not willing to settle, so no matter how long you stay in mediation, it's never going to happen. So if I'm a party who is rich enough and I do not care about the time also, I just want to buy extra time from the other party, I will go for mediation and I will not show my interest of settlement. But as per the contract, you have to be in mediation with me. So that's a dead end for you because you can't do anything. And I'm just ending up wasting time, money, and just buying some more time for my dispute. So that's also another drawback. Okay, so as we all know that we are in a difficult situation of COVID, and there are few industries who have been affected by it majorly. There are few industries who have not been affected by it, and there are few industries who have been uprooted because of COVID, like e-commerce. So, like amidst everything, even the commercial contracts are also facing disputes because of pandemic. Because as we all know that all these commercial contracts does have a time limit attached to them. So if the dispute occur in your commercial contracts, how does MedArb helps you to deal away with this dispute? I will begin by explaining you by the terms. So if there is a dispute in your hand because of the contract during COVID, the first thing you would look at it is that you find a force majeure clause. So force majeure means act of God. It's the superior power that something so majorly happened that was beyond your control, and that has been happened by any superior power. So like pandemic is like we never foreseen it. It was not in our hand. So it's an act of God and it's covered by force majeure. So force majeure is a very nice thing for the parties, but the worst part is it's not a legal remedy. It's a contractual remedy. So if your contract at the time of signing the contract, if you added a force majeure clause, then it's a good thing. Otherwise, you cannot use it despite that these situations are beyond our control. So that's step one, to identify whether your contract has any force majeure clause. Now, in commercial contracts, you just not look at the main contract, you look at the terms of references as well. You look at the GCC, the guidance, you look at the emails and everything. Everything are the ancillary to the main contract, and court actually consider them a part of the contract. So if you find a force majeure clause, that's good. But the story does not end there. First, you identify it. If you find it, it's good that we go to the second step. If you don't find it, then story ends there. But if you find it, then you have to see. Usually, these force majeure clause in the contracts are specifically designed. So, if you and I have a shipping contract, so then usually the force majeure clause would say that okay, if something happens in the water, like turbulence and everything, then you will get a relief, something like that. So force majeure clause are usually very specific. So even if now in this case, even if you have a force majeure clause, but you are not facing trouble because of the sea, you're facing trouble because of the COVID. So despite having a force majeure clause, you will still not be able to use it. But if there's clause says anything about the superior power beyond the control of humans, if terms like these are available in your contract, then also you have some chance, because then you tell the court or the tribunal that this pandemic is also beyond my control. So that's when you get a relief, and that's too not a complete relief, but a partial relief as per the ambit of your clause. Second clause is frustration. Now, a lot of people mix force majeure and frustration because both of them are beyond the control of a human being. But force majeure is beyond the control because of the act of God. Frustration is basically when something is not in your hand despite not doing anything wrong. For example, I and you have a contract. I have a building. I ask you to take a contract and design my building. But if you come tomorrow and my building has been, for example, demolished by Delhi municipality because I don't have a proper license and everything. So now if the building has ceased to exist, you can't design it. So although it was not an act of God, but it was still beyond your control because you didn't do anything wrong, but you still can't complete your contract. That's what frustration is basically about. Good news is that it's not a contractual remedy, it's a recognized legal remedy. Your Indian Contract Act talks about frustration. So even if you don't have a force majeure clause, don't worry. There's a second step that you come to frustration. Okay, you can tell the court or the tribunal that, listen, I have frustration in my uh, legal remedy and I want to practice it. But the bad news is there is a very high onus to prove frustration. The burden of proof in frustration contracts are very high. That so if you tell, and the judges do not like it, and the tribunal also doesn't like it, so you might end up frustrating the judges or the panel when you talk about frustration. Now, if you say that because of the pandemic, you're not having money, you can't do anything, and the deal which was looking commercially attractive to you a year back is no longer a commercially attractive thing right now. So it's frustration. No, it's not frustration. The court or the tribunal would say, too bad, but you have to deal with it. Frustration is when you can't do absolutely anything about it, which is why I said that the burden of proof is very high in frustration. So then what comes to the rescue? The only hope is about the principle of pacta sunt servanda. So pacta sunt servanda principle means that the contract would be performed as it is. So if you and I have signed the terms, you should perform that terms in the same good faith, in the same manner, provided the second part of the Latin phrase says the rebuscus sis stantibus, which means provided the circumstances also remains the same. So now the circumstances are not the same. You can ask the court that or the tribunal that the circumstances are not the same. So which is why you want the terms of the contract to be reconsidered. In that case, you might get some relaxation from the tribunal. So what is the role of Med-Arb into this? The role is, since both the parties are facing hardships, because let's take an example of you have a deal with a Chinese seller, and there are 500 cars that are coming from the China. Now, because of the border, the cars cannot come straight from China to India. So maybe the Chinese seller is sending you cars through Pakistan, or maybe traveling through the whole Cape and coming from Sri Lanka to you while you are based in Delhi. So now when you say to the court that I have incurred so much of losses because of the shipment, so I can't pay, but they will be like, too bad. Even if you have lost so much of money in it, you still have got the thing and it's still a contract. So now the parties, it's a difficult situation for both the parties because A needs the money and B doesn't have that much money to give. So what they do in that case, they do away from the arbitration and they come and sit and talk to each other and during mediation and say that, okay, you are in trouble, I'm in trouble because of the pandemic, what do we do? So through that, parties either can settle for 50% losses, that okay, you take this much loss and I take that much loss, or the party says that we still have 5 years of contract ahead us, so why don't we freeze this, make the profits in next year, and then take it from there. So that's how mediation Med-Arb helps the parties not only to continue with the business, but to also escape from the difficult situations such as this pandemic. Yeah, and very important thing, like I understand that ADR and Med-Arb and these multi-tier dispute clauses are actually really helpful, but what is more important is that the drafting. The only enforceability that you can get to these clauses is by drafting clear, crisp clauses. Otherwise, the enforceability would be an issue. So if tomorrow your arbitration agreement have that all and every dispute arising in and out of this contract is dealt with mutual understanding and then for arbitration. Now this word of mutual understanding is very vague. What by mutual understanding? Are you talking about mediation, or are you talking about negotiation, or are you talking about conciliation? Or what is the ambit of mutual understanding? Is it for like 1 day? Is it for 1 hour? The emails which I have sent to you and the emails which you have sent to me in revert by refusing it is also mutual understanding that I tried to solve this matter mutually with you. So what is exactly is mutual understanding? Which is why your drafting should be to the point where you say that you first need to go for mediation for 10 months, let's say, and if it fails, then you go to arbitration. In that manner, you're being very clear, you're showing your intention that you do have an intention to go through different layers before going for an arbitration, because you do have an intention to save your relationship and save yourself in the future. So drafting really matters. So a good lawyer would be that who drafts these clauses very well, because it's still easy to do with the dispute, but it's not very easy to draft it. So you have to be with utmost consciousness, you need to draft these contracts. Yeah, and that's about from my side. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to take it from you.
Thank you, Anjali.
Yeah.
That was really very, very comprehensive, and you took us through a gamut of things and implications, which we really appreciate from your end. What I found most interesting in your presentation today was that not only did you deal with the static part of what Med-Arb really means, but also the fallout in terms of what is going to happen to commercial contracts when COVID-19 pandemic starts showing its implications. I would just request you to stop sharing your screen. That would give a better sort of view to the audience of both of us, and we can then engage in a quick conversation.
Okay.
Yes, this is better. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there are a number of questions, and I myself am intrigued and with all the insightful comments and observations that you have made today. So the first question that has come from the audience, let's take the audience question first, and then I have a couple of my own questions here. So there's a gentleman called Mr. Mihir Popat, and he would like to ask you, or rather, he's asked you, that what are some of the salient features of an arbitral award in India? Because that is one of the things that would then determine the enforceability or the non-enforceability of an award. So, very basic question about arbitral awards and what they really are, whether they're enforceable or not, and what are some of the features of an arbitral award?
Yeah. So in India, I assume that you want to ask about domestic arbitration award or international arbitration award, because both are different. If we are
Yeah, of
talking
course.
about if we are talking
Uh,
about domestic arbitration
I
award,
think though he's asked only about India, I think dealing with both would be fine.
okay. So domestic arbitration award is as good as a judgment because it's final and binding. So the time these award come into the picture, these award can only be challenged under section 34 and 37 of Arbitration Act on a limited ground. That means that it was so perverse that it caused a threat to the legal system, or I mean, like, there were few irregularities. The court cannot go into the merits of the case again, because that would be as good as giving an appeal to arbitration awards, and arbitration award does not support an appeal. And also, if you give an appeal to arbitration award, like if you open the questions about merit, that means the courts are stepping into an arbitration. The very basic fact of introducing arbitration was that the court had so much of backlog to cover that they have made a quasi judicial body, which is an arbitral tribunal, to deal with the commercial dispute. Now, if you
Sure.
let the court again to have a merits into the case, then as good as coming back to the court, which is why you cannot open the merits. You can only challenge the award under very limited circumstances. DDA versus Associate Builder, which was 2017 judgment, I believe, was when Supreme Court of India actually clarified the scope of these challenges under domestic law. In international law, also it's final and binding. But in international law, you need to go for an enforcement under New York Convention, because the people actually take a neutral place for the award. So once the award is there, you need ultimately people wants money from the award. That's the main end of the award, that I want the money from me. Now I'm not going to get the money from the tribunal which has given the award, because that was a neutral place. I need to
Mm.
go to the country where the opposite party has some assets through which I can get the money. So in that country, I need to go under article 5 and find the enforcement of my award. First enforcement means that that country would recognize this award as good as their own judgment, and once they recognize it, they enforce it, then I can get money. And you can enforce it anytime. But
Oh,
what people enforcement actually takes a lot of money and a lot of time. So what people do, people go and recognize it. Recognize is basically, uh, in simple term, it's like getting your award notarized, that you have given them the idea that this is my award. So just establish it in your legal system. Don't give it enforcement right now, I can take this later, but just for your knowledge.
makes a lot of sense. The other question that we received is sort of a follow-up question by Mr. Shayan Srivastava, one of our attendees. He's asked a very interesting question. So he's saying that since the arbitral award is binding and final, isn't it riskier than a litigation process? Because at least in litigation, you have a legal hierarchy that you can go through. If you lose your case in the lower court, you go to the higher court, and then you go high court, and then you go to the Supreme Court. So you still have a chance of appeal. But in an arbitration proceeding, while there is a flexibility of procedure as compared to litigation, also there is a risk wherein your award is final and binding, and that could put you in an adverse situation. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so as you have mentioned that there is a lot of flexibility. So you parties actually have a lot of say in arbitration, because everything works on the parties' choices. If the party's autonomy is compromised at any step, the award ceases to exist. The tribunal ceases to exist. People actually challenge the tribunal. So you actually have a lot of power. And being a commercial actor, you do not look for much what is just or what is not. You look for your maximizing of profit. So being a commercial party, when I see that I have a lot of say in my dispute, which I have not gotten in judiciary, I would definitely go for an arbitration. Second thing is how in judiciary, in Indian judiciary, our roster keep on changing. So is the judges on your case. So what the new judge has understanding is based on the file which is written. They don't know you, what you're going through, what was your journey. So my knowledge, if I'm a judge who is a new judge and you are already at, from you started from A and you are only at H point, I now know the story from H to Z if I continue on your topic, and I just know the previous knowledge because of the file. I'm not going to go back in the case again and listen to you. Whereas a tribunal, when it is established, is listens to your story from point A to point Z completely. So it's much more clarity in that thought. And the other thing is arbitration has a lot of step. Arbitration is not that easy that you go and things happen. There's a proper way of recording your evidences. There's a proper way when witnesses are called. There's a proper way when you have conferences, change claims, counterclaims, rebuttals. There is a cross examination. So there's a lot in arbitration, and the chances of making these mistakes are less. It's not that the parties are not getting a hierarchy. So they're doing a full-fledged activity in a normal sense. And even if you go in appeal, again, the court doesn't go in the merit of the cases. They only see the perversity, what happens in the appeal, because even for, like, there are Katina of judgments which says that even if if the person has a different perception, like if there's a glass which is half empty, if I say if it's half empty, another judge says if it's half full, both of them are correct. So just because somebody has some another line of thought, you can't challenge it, even if you are in appeal. So same thing happened in arbitration. If you think that there is a perversity, of course section 34 and 37 gives you a right to deal with that perversity. And if you just want to talk about merit, then it's not even allowing litigation, so let alone arbitration. So it's the same thing.
Okay. So that's a strong case of going on arbitration as opposed to litigation. That
Definitely.
there's, both are devils and there's nothing of a lesser devil here. So
Yeah.
coming to the next question. So basically, we all know that alternate dispute resolution is just an umbrella term for so many dispute resolution methods. As you rightly said, med-art, there's arbitration, there is mediation, then there is conciliation, and so on and so forth. And as we move forward, there are so many hybrid approaches that are coming up in this world. So how does an arbitrator, potential, dispute resolution officer or a advocate in your case, decide that which method is best suitable for the party or parties that come to the particular advocate? Because the ultimate goal is dispute resolution, but the method is something that can become very key and very specific to circumstances. So how do you really decide, or is that a matter of practice that really comes through?
So yeah, this is actually a very good thing also and a bad thing as well, because like I mentioned about the interest-based negotiation. So whenever you go to an international attorney, they would first ask you, what do you actually want to achieve ultimately? Like initially, everyone would be, I want the money also, I want the apology also, I want contract also, but you don't get everything. So being an attorney, it's your like onus is on you to explain them what they can get it, what is their best possible thing. And people do a lot of forum shopping, right, while choosing an attorney as well. And a lot of companies actually does it because for example, there's an energy dispute and I know that these 10 lawyers are prominent lawyers. So what I do, before other party reaches to me, I reach to all 10 of them, and once you disclose your memo, they can't take the other party case because then there'll be a conflict of interest. So a lot of big companies use it as a tactic to, like, cover all the attorneys so that they don't take somebody else case. So that's how people
Yeah.
do forum shopping. They find out what's best for them and they finally pick a client, like an attorney for them.
For sure, and you made very interesting points about rationalizing the interests of your clients and also rationalizing the expectations, because initially it's an ego battle and it's a battle wherein everyone is charged up in an anger and want to rip the other party apart. But then you bring them back to ground and say, listen, it's a dispute, so you have some positives and negatives in your case, and similarly that party has some positives and negatives. And I think long back we studied negotiation in law school, wherein we understood the term batna, which means your best alternative to negotiation. And that is something that comes into practice day in and day out when you're an arbitrator, because you're essentially negotiating between the two parties in some way. and trying to be neutral in that process. Another question which is very common, and there's a myth, so I would like you to, Anjali, to bust it for our viewers today, that they think that arbitration is, very least expensive. It's really a cost-free method as compared to litigation. But as we have seen, precedence shows otherwise. Sometimes arbitration proceedings can go on for so long, and people can be so unreasonable in arbitration proceedings that they can actually turn out to be more expensive than a litigation. And that has happened in more than one case, right? In a number of cases. So would you like to throw some light on that?
Yes,
Why do
guys.
arbitration?
Yeah, guys, it's not. It's pretty expensive. It's at times it's more expensive than litigation. Companies actually go into liquidation while dealing with their arbitration dispute because it's that expensive. We have something which is again a very big topic to discuss. It's called something called TPAs, third party fundings. So how these angel investors have now established firms where people go only for their arbitration dispute. So if I have a dispute with some another person and I'm a claimant, I'm the one who is putting the claim. So that means I have a stronger claim, which is why I'm going as a claimant. I go and make a presentation to these third party funders and tell them that this is my dispute and I do not have money to pursue this dispute. So I need money from you. These third party investors does a whole complete set of due diligence on you, look into your case, get all the rights from you. So even if your dispute is going, they have a say in it. They basically own you now, and they put money into the cases so that you can win this case. And once you win, a major portion of your winning they take it straight up with the loans, because it's just like a loan with heavy interest. It's like a non-collateral loan, how we get non-collateral loan which has a high rate interest. So arbitration is not cheap at all. It's really expensive.
Thank you for bringing out that clarity in today's discussion, because this is something that lawyers, even young law graduates, realize after 1 or 2 years of practice, that that is the case, that because we have a textbook understanding of what arbitration is. But when you do a master's, because I also, when I did my master's from Queen Mary, my focus was arbitration, and I was surprised to know, that it's a method which can turn out to be more expensive than litigation. And the second point which came to my notice in those times was that arbitration is actually the first step to litigation, but because none of the parties nor the lawyers want to go to court, so they try to settle it in a way that disputes get resolved out of court first, and if that doesn't happen, then you eventually go to court. So those are two important learnings that I had in my masters, and I thought we could bring it to our discussion today. So another question which has been asked by Deepa Rajendran, Deepa Rajendran, one of our attendees, is asking that is an amendment possible in an arbitration agreement similar to the amendment of court petitions? So that's the question.
Amendment in what sort? Because you can't make a changes once you have an arbitration clause, and arbitration clause are very generic. There is nothing like court petitions. They're very specific. Arbitration clauses basically are like 2 or 3 line clause. Because of the separability principle, it is considered as a whole agreement, but it's not an agreement. It's just a 2 3 line, and the ambit is very wide. It says disputes in, out, regarding, related, words like that are used so that you can add whatever you want to add. If she is asking for the amendment during the arbitration proceeding, yes, it's allowed, provided the other party does not have any problem with it, and your arbitrator also see that there is a merit. Because if these amendments are not added into the petition right now, the award would not be like it would be biased award, or the award would not be correct. So your
Sure.
agreement doesn't give agreement gives you a very broad right to raise anything and everything. It's for your tribunal and for the other party to justify that whether it should be or it should not be a part of an arbitration.
I know it's a mutual process, and it's a very collaborative process. So it would really depend, the amendments that you make to your arbitration agreement would really depend on the facts and circumstances during that stage of the arbitration proceeding. So
Yeah.
yes, it's possible, but at what stage and how much is something that is determined by the parties and the arbitrator himself or herself. That's what
But
we are getting.
yeah, and it's also a drawback when you have a multi-tier dispute resolution clause, because if you're making amendment after the parties have come from the mediation, then also it's a conflict of interest, because your clause said that your whole dispute should go to mediation first and then to arbitration. So if the parties are raising the dispute after coming from mediation in the final stage of arbitration, the chances are that they won't get, like, the probability is very low of admitting those clauses, because then it's the conflict of right, because you didn't use mediation for these claims that you're raising now. So that's also one of the drawback of MEDA.
Oh, that's very, very well rounded. Answer. Let's move on to the next question by one of our attendees. Are you able to hear me, Anjali?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the question is how mediation and arbitration work in contracts. Can we go for consumer protection even if there is an arbitration clause? So I think he means consumer forums, and whether how does mediation and arbitration work in e-contracts, and can a consumer or a person go to the consumer forum even if there is an arbitration clause?
Consumer forum, the dispute which is to be dealt with consumer forum, I know internationally there are few countries like Switzerland and US which deals the consumer complaints also in arbitration proceeding, but India is not at that advanced stage. So if you have any dispute which is raised out of the consumer protection, you can't go for arbitration. You have to go for the national consumer redressal or your state consumer redressal. So consumer protection disputes are basically not much covered with arbitration in India. Internationally, few jurisdiction, yes, allows them, but few jurisdiction does not because of their sovereignty, because they think that their consumer, their parties, so the state should have a right on it. And what was the second thing? You asked something else as well.
It's the same thing. So, how does mediation and arbitration work in e-contracts, and if a matter is sort of
Yes.
in arbitration, whether one can go to consumer forum?
Yeah, so we something have okay, because then we something have called as ODR. So ADR is alternate dispute remedy, ODR is online dispute remedy. So now I know that times are tough and it's pandemic, but in actually a lot of arbitration does happen through video conferencing, what we call it ODR, where everything is uh, registered online and things are taking through video conferences and everything.
Yeah, and with the pandemic, this is only going to increase, and that's what we have been seeing. Even courts have gone online, so arbitration is something that is bound to go online. Of course, it has been online for a while, but now just the magnitude and the scale has just increased multifold. Because disputes keep happening, and they have to be resolved one way or the other. Now, another question that we've got from Saswata Dhar is that can you elaborate on the point of submission agreement, how it works, and if there is a need to have it covered under agreement terms?
Okay, so submission agreement is basically an arbitration agreement which people design after the dispute has occurred. So it's the agreement which deals with the present dispute, unlike the ADR contract which deals with the future dispute. Parties usually have it decided. I've not seen it much in domestic arbitration, but in international arbitration, it is a general practice. So why people do it? So because there are certain industries which are too technical and they think that drafting an ADR right now is not going to be benefited for them. So once but they have a mutual understanding that okay, if the dispute occurs, we will go to arbitration because that's beneficial for us. So once the dispute occurred, your submission agreement is as good as yes, they're pretty much agreement because they are covered under the law. They are identified very much in the ADR setup. So if you talk about submission agreement, it is not an alien term. It's a well-established practice. Submission agreement is as good as your opening statement because now you know about your dispute. When ADR clause is made, you have no idea about your dispute. You're just making an umbrella clause that if in future something happens, it's like an insurance that you're just insuring yourself, not knowing about the disease that you're going to get. But submission agreement is like right now you are in front of the doctor, so you have the whole medical thing that what happened. So then you explain that okay, this was the dispute which happened because of XYZ reason, and now these are my claims. So submission agreement is very elaborated so that you can explain your whole dispute to it.
That is very, very insightful. Then another question by Mr. Kabir Usman, wherein you would like to know is the concept of seat venue as muddled up in other jurisdictions as it is in India? What do you want to say about this based on your own experience of working in India and abroad?
Okay. So seat and venue is, I think it's a pretty much established in India as well, but parties keep on bringing it again back to the courts with one reason or another. And
Hmm.
Singapore again is still now dealing with the question of seat and venue. Although if you ask people in general parlance in international setup, it's not a difficult concept to understand, and 99% of the time attorneys do understand it, but it is used as a smoke screen so that parties can take some benefit out of the laws. So which is why people usually muggled it up. It's like a practice, and it's not something which is much more confused. But yeah, seat and venue is pretty much established and covered all over the countries, in fact in India as well. They would just like you to believe that it's misunderstood, but it's not.
All right, that is good to know, and in industry insight into seat venue. Shreya Srivastav has a question wherein he would like to know that can ADR be used for non-corporate cases in India alone, or such a dispute regarding, or can it be used for a dispute regarding encroachment of property between two neighbors?
No,
That's
property
pretty.
rights have to go to litigation. There are certain things that, as I've mentioned, because it's a state sovereign function. Arbitration is a quasi-judicial body. It's not a judicial body, which means you're giving a private person some right into your state function. So property, your taxes, your I mean, like borders and everything, all these disputes, state has the say into it. You cannot go for an arbitration. In fact, your competition dispute also. Now the market for competition dispute is opening for arbitration. Otherwise, it's a clear state function. You cannot go for arbitration in this. And non-corporate dispute, yes, you can use ADR. For example, people use ADR when there is an accident and you have a compensation claims, people take it in ADR. There is a divorce petition that is coming along. Usually now there's a practice in our courts per se that before moving a dispute for divorce, parties do go to mediation. So mediation and conciliation is something which is being used in rural governance. Mediation and conciliation are the biggest tool that has been used. Parties belonging to village areas, they don't go to litigation for small thing. uh, Something which we call the Panchayat Raj is all about mediation, that where all five people sit and they decide for your matters. So yes, ADR is pretty much available and has been there in non-corporate dispute as well.
Amazing. Deepa has a question for you. So I'm rephrasing her question a bit. What are the qualities that you think a successful arbitrator should have?
Okay, first of all, not to have opinion of your own, or even if you have, not to show them, because arbitrators are the most sensitive people in the whole dispute. uh, it's a human tendency, like when you're losing a game, the thing you say is like the dice is not proper, or there's a fan that's going on, so you try and find different excuses. Similarly, in dispute, when things are not going according to your planning and plotting, then you say, oh, the arbitrator is biased, or the arbitrator is impartial, arbitrator is not transparent. So arbitrator has to be very careful. So make sure that you do not have any conversation with any other client in the absence of any other person. All your communications have to be CC to all. It should be clear. You don't talk to about case to anybody except your own panel. And then, yeah, just listen to everybody. Don't make your own opinion. Do not give additional remedy. Even if you think that the party should get interest in this thing, don't give it until asked to do so. And that's about it. Your like the choice of parties picking you over is based on your choice of expertise. There are a lot of centers, which is like ICC, SIAC, Mumbai Arbitration Center. So you enroll yourself in their list. That's how parties pick you from the for their dispute. That okay, this arbitrator knows this thing, so I will pick it to them. Shri?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I think there was a connection issue.
No worries, no
Uh,
worries.
okay, so can I ask you the next question? Were you able to
Mm-hmm.
answer this one?
Yeah. Please, please.
I hope the attendees heard that. So now the next question really is that everyone wants a successful successful resolution of dispute at the end of the day. So Ms. Tasha Joseph has asked you that is there a high rate of success when it comes to the Med-Arb approach that has been taken up in India or otherwise?
Can you repeat your question, Shri?
Sure. So the question really is by Tasha Joseph, and she wants to ask you that is there a successful rate in resolution of disputes by approaching or adopting the method of MEDAR in India or abroad?
Yeah, definitely. Because as I said that it helps you to reduce your time and money, and it also helps you with a business relationship. Because how international system was set up was law of merchants. Like people believed each other saying, like somebody said something, somebody established some customs, and that's how the community of commercial businesses were brought into the life. So definitely, MEDARP helps you to establish your relationship. I personally, when I was back in Delhi High Court, we had this case of a pharma company where there was a dispute of, I think, like in crores, it was the dispute, and this another party had some drugs to give to the other to distribute, but he was not distributing, thinking that he would get everything else in arbitration, and he could have revived the losses of approximately 40 lakh rupees. So we sent these parties who were like so headstrong that I'm not going to pay, and the other party was like, I'm not going to sell these drugs, to mediation,
Hmm.
and resultantly they actually sold all those 40 lakh rupees drugs. The other party got money back from the company, and they
Hmm.
entered into a next contract. So definitely med helps you to hold on to your relationship.
Okay, so that seems like a tagline, hold on to that relationship, hold on to that client. Okay, so another question that Kabir Usman is asking of you is that is your claim of mediation arbitration being more beneficial than just arbitration an empirical claim or not? Because making mediation a prerequisite seems rather counterproductive to the idea of an arbitration being time and cost friendly.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just not my topic was mediation and arbitration because of the paucity of time, but I definitely believe in multi-tier dispute resolution clauses, negotiation being one, conciliation being another one. Then we have something called dispute resolution boards, which is almost there in all the FIDIC contracts, like the contract about the investment and concentration constructions, and then there are a lot of the almost all Airport Authority of India, Rail Development Corporation, they all have their dispute resolution board. So arbitration, although it looks to you is a single layer thing, it's never a single layer thing because they all have their in-house mechanism. The fact that dispute comes to you has already been surpassed from one level. So most of the disputes are multi-tier clause, and it's really important to have that because it does save your time, but more than time and money, it's about the relationships because you are a straight actor, you don't want to mess things up with another companies because it's not like you just have one contract with this another company. This company might be indulgence with some another company, so it's like a whole blockchain thing. So that's the thing, I always think that multi-tier dispute resolution is definitely more productive than arbitration.
That is quite clarifying and encouraging because a lot of times you think it's one single process, but it could take multiple processes for the dispute to get resolved.
Yeah.
There's
And my
another
dad
question.
also says one thing that जब प्यार से काम बनता है तो बिगाड़ना क्यों है? So when you can do it mediation and negotiation, why do you want to go for an arbitration?
Exactly, that's so true. And it's an entire spectrum from mediation to litigation, right? And that's something that we study in arbitration, that when you are looking at dispute resolution, it's the entire spectrum. You will begin with negotiation, go to mediation, then arbitration, and then finally litigation if things don't. And of course, you have sub points in between, but this is an entire spectrum
Yeah.
of dispute resolution. Uh, then Narendra Kumar had a question for you, and it's a practical one rather. Can we hold arbitration meetings through Zoom and recordings can be issued as per appointment letter if the meeting is supposed to be held in geographic areas where the work is awarded? So probably you can answer the first part of it, that whether arbitration can happen on Zoom and can recordings can be issued.
Yeah, arbitration always like international arbitration per se. A lot of arbitration disputes happens online. Well, they have their own email system and their own video recording system because of the privacy issues, like all these other channels have. But yeah, it's very much there. And about recording, they don't share the recording. We call something called transcript, which means you have people who are taking live notes of it when things are happening. So simultaneously, when you are adjudicating the dispute, there would be some third person who is taking notes of it, like how in our trial court, when criminal matter happens, people take notes of it. So you will get, definitely you will have the say of seeing those transcripts. It's all there on the
Okay, great.
record.
There's a question by Akanksha who's asking you, what are some of the recommendations through which we can strengthen the arbitration procedure in India or the practice of going to arbitration in India? Are there any recommendations coming from your point of view?
Yes, right now, UNCITRAL committee, which is United Nations Committee for making the arbitration rules furthermore. One thing is like how India is doing. They're making more and more amendments to the Arbitration Act, because how you can attract a lot of arbitration is through investors abroad. And if your regime is such that which is really beneficial for the investors, and India being the country which is of course cheaper for them in comparison to Europe and US jurisdiction, and our geographical location, since we are so near to Singapore, we are in Asia. So that's how we can take advantages of it, by making continuous amendment, by keeping up with the international market, and by having a stability, because that's what people look for it. So if we have judgments and award one after the another, which are more stable and which are more similar in nature, then people would have more trust into the jurisdiction, that okay, this jurisdiction does not fluctuate much, so it's pretty much established, the law is pretty much concrete, so we can go there, because nobody likes surprises in arbitration. So everybody likes a predictability. So if they can predict your laws, if they can predict their chances of winning, they would definitely make India a next hub for arbitration, and it's actually happening.
Yes, of course. And in fact, your seat of arbitration is London and Singapore, which are the best seats of arbitration, at least in this area. And that is something close to India. It's not very far. So one could take advantages of that. And you see a lot of senior advocates flying in and out for international arbitration
Definitely.
because it is so convenient to travel to these two locations. And India certainly is picking up, but there's a lot of infrastructure and other issues, that adaptability issues that have to be taken care of. There's another interesting question by Shian Srivastava, who's saying that aren't corporate lawyers at a risk of losing large lawsuits or legal matters because there is ADR?
No, because India has a lot of population and there are a lot of market that's coming. And with COVID, a lot and lot international firms are making everything online. So there are new systems and setups coming. So nobody is running out of business, that's for sure. And in fact, all the corporate giants have the special dispute resolution team and arbitration. Like I have interned at almost like all the first tier law firms, and I've seen arbitration center in all of them. So they're not losing any money. They would rather get some more clients with it. So it's actually going to be opposite for them.
Yes, in fact, just adding a quick point here, in my experience of working in an international law firm, so you have an arbitration team, you have a solid litigation team. So if arbitration goes south, then the matter goes to litigation. So actually,
Yeah.
the firm has a lot of business because they have
Yeah.
already built up the trust with the arbitration team and they know the quality of it, etc. And then they move on to the litigation team. So you have sort of two matters from the same client based on your expertise. So
Yeah,
that's what
and
I really love.
also, yeah, adding on to what Shireen said, like I have seen in Luthra when I was interning in my second year, even if the arbitration team has some case and there's some matters which is pertaining to corporate structuring or pertaining to SEBI guidelines, they have a capital team working with them. So it's not necessary that if one team has got a case, only they can work. Usually teams are mixed based on the matters and they work together. So yeah, even the corporate team has a lot of say in arbitration matters.
Yes, very true. And corporate law firms actually do not only deal with one kind of matter, they deal with a lot
Exactly.
of matters. That is another thing that there is a myth amongst law students and law aspirants that corporate law means only like one kind of matter, but no, it has a lot of aspects to it. There's a question by Mahesh Babu wherein he's asking, are compromise and arbitration the same? So basically, he's saying that what is this kind of procedure wherein there's so much of adjustment. So I think this question is stemming from that point. Are compromise and arbitration the same according to you? It's a more of philosophical question. What do you think, Anjali?
Yeah, I mean, like, what sort of compromises? I would just turn my deaf ear to this question, because if it's like an illegal compromises, if you find, for example, I read about this important landmark case where somebody tried to give legalization to smuggling of the carpets. So although it was, but then there are a lot of jurisdiction that have a say in it. Even if you try so hard, go to different jurisdiction, try to give legal picture to it, ultimately you're going to come back to the home country or the country where you want to enforce it, because the money is coming from the enforcement country only. So it's not that easy, because there are so many layers to it. And if the compromises which is made amongst the party is reasonable and mutually decided, then arbitration respect that because of the party autonomy. But if there is an irrational compromises, any which ways, it's not going to be heard by the arbitrator, because party autonomy principle of equality, which is very much embedded in national and international system, like it's embedded in model law, and our country has adapted model law. So your 34 talks about it. If it's irrational or it's not unequal, the compromises cannot be embedded into an arbitration. And as I said, that arbitrators are very sensitive to the questions of impartiality and transparency. So even if the parties want to make a compromise with them, the other party won't let that happen.
Great. Now there's another question by Kabir Usman. His question is it possible to provide for an appellate arbitral tribunal in the arbitration agreement itself?
No, because arbitration does not recognize appeal. Some jurisdiction does, like India, but that's very limited. You can read Section 34 of model law. You will know or Article 5 of New York Convention. You will know about those limited grounds where you can actually go to the courts and ask for it. So it's not as an appeal, but it's just like a check-on method that arbitration is going the straight way. The whole idea of doing away with the appeal was that arbitration is done by the expert. So they have already taken a lot of time in deciding the thing. Why to make it lengthy? The reason why people shifted from litigation to arbitration was to save time. And then introducing arbitration, we are just reversing the process. So it doesn't make sense to have an appellate tribunal.
Okay. A word to the attendees. We have already gone a little beyond time, so I'll just be taking the last two questions. And sorry about not answering some of the questions. We have had too many questions today. But if you have those questions, I'm happy to send you Anjali's email ID, and she'll be happy to answer. Sure.
Yeah.
So the last two questions, out of that, the first question is from Mehak Malhotra, when she's asking, is blockchain booming in arbitration as well in India and abroad? Basically, is there a connect between blockchain and arbitration? Have we seen any cases? I'm sure it's too early for it to evolve, but is there some kind of a linkage happening in that zone?
Yeah, definitely. Blockchain itself is a very big ambit to goes into it, because blockchain is now being connected with artificial intelligence as well. So it's like continuously coming up, and definitely arbitration is involved into it, because most of the blockchain things is happening with overseas clients. So whenever there is an international parties into a picture, nobody would go to the courts and litigation, because everyone has a threat that if I go to somebody's else jurisdiction, A, I do not know law about it, and B, the jurisdiction might be partial towards me. So nobody wants to go for litigation. So definitely with blockchain, arbitration is also booming, and it's altogether a new feel to it. If you want to discuss this in detail with me, you can reach me on my LinkedIn, but it's just too broad to take this up right now to divide into this question of blockchain.
Definitely, we can understand. There are number of the attendees had a single question, so I'm just clubbing it. So Sophia, Ayushi, Ikra have asked you basically the question. The crux of the question is then how can they become as successful as you in the field of arbitration? So how do they plan their internships? What kind of books should they read? How should they hone their research and writing skills? should they do an LLM or not? And finally, is it a viable career option?
Yeah,
So just
thank you
answer
for
it.
that question.
How,
Yeah,
what did you?
nothing. I think you can begin by reading. Doing an LLM or not doing an LLM is a bigger question that you need to take time and think about it, because you're investing your time, money, finances is a very big thing. Because if you're doing masters from your foreign, any foreign countries, please look for scholarships and plan and then see what you want to do. As a beginning point, there are a lot of free engines which is available. One is Global Arbitration Review, which is GAR. Another one is Kluwer, or you can connect to the SEC site, start reading about it, start seeing how arbitration is going on. And then Shireen can tell you better about the Queen Mary surveys on arbitration. They are pretty good and everybody follows them. You can go and see that. And then model law, United Nations, all the websites are open. So start reading about it. I think the main point is reading. Nobody's going to come and teach you. It all begins with reading. And then if you want, start taking up a research assistantship position with the people who are writing about it, and you can get to know about them through LinkedIn. Do that. Try, and there are a lot of arbitration blogs that have come up, so you can start writing about it also. And yeah, and then you take up from there. Join a senior in the court which has an arbitration uh, practice, or join LR-ship with the judge who has an arbitration roster, and work and see if you like it. And if you do, then yeah, take it up from there.
So one last question. I'm sure we are really exceeding time here, but for the law aspirants, because many of the attendees today are people who are aspiring to pursue law. So what would your advice be to them in choosing their law school? Because this is also the season for competitive exams and gaining admissions in law schools. So top three things that you would want a law student to look at in a particular law school before taking an admission, because you're investing 5 long years or 3 long years of your life getting your first legal degree. So what are those things that you would like them to pay attention to?
Yeah, so the law is just not what you see in Boston Legal and Suits. So if you have that idea behind pursuing law, drop it right now. Understand that for law, you need to read every day. Like when I was joining law school, my dad was like, "सोच ले एक बार फिर से रोज पढ़ना पड़ेगा," because a lawyer can never stop studying. You have to study every day. So you see that whether you can read, do you have an ability to read and write, because it's endless. Like I don't remember, there were time when I was just sleeping 3 hours. There were time when I went without like a week without sleeping. So you have to read, you have to write about it. It's like after when you enter law school, after 12th, they would just like bombard you with drafting, a lot of legal jargons and everything. So patience, perseverance, you need to have lots and lots of patience, and thinking that it actually you will get through this, because law is like an open sea when you don't know swimming. So yeah, just hold on to it. It will happen eventually, it will come. But then be persistent, do what you're doing. It will lead to frustration, because all your draftings would come all red in mark, but it will happen. So like wait for it. I actually read something on LinkedIn today morning before joining this webinar, and I actually took a screenshot to share it with the everyone. So it said that
Please do.
one day you will tell your story of how you have overcome what you're doing through now, and it will become part of someone else's survival guide. So just be humble, just hold on to that, and you'll be fine. If you still want to do law, you have compassion, go for it. It's a really humbling and overwhelming experience for me personally.
Thank you, Anjali. On that lovely note, I would like to thank you for taking out your time and dealing with such an important topic, Mehtab, especially in times which are so unprecedented. Sharing your knowledge, sharing your expertise, and most importantly, sharing your valuable advice of the life experience that you have had so far in your professional journey. We at OP Jindal Global University, especially at the Alumni Relations Office, are proud of your achievements so far, and we can see that you have something bright coming your way because of the fact that you're passionate and this seems to be like your true calling. Uh, and this is something evident from your webinar today. So I think you have really found a space for yourself in the professional world, especially in terms of your expertise. And you were quick at getting to that because you were really observant and mindful of where you are headed while you were at law school. So you did take up the opportunity seriously, and as you said, you worked through it and you have been working through it. So we hope that your professional journey and all that you think of doing in the next 5, 10 years does come to true, and you keep coming back whenever you achieve a milestone or whenever you feel like there's enough gathered again to share with the legal fraternity and especially with the law students. So on that note, I would like to thank you again for taking out your time and
Thank you.
just close the comments. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the people who took out time and attended this lecture. Thank you so much, Shireen, for hosting me, for making this possible. I'm more than happy to share it. And definitely, if anybody has any question, you can take my email from Shireen. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to have you all in my inbox. Yeah, thank you so much.
That's great. That's very gracious of you. Thank you to the attendees for being so patient and for posing such lovely set of questions, I must say. If we had more time, we would have taken more questions, but honestly, we tried to cover as much was possible. Uh, Thank you for your patience, and the webinar for today has ended. So have a nice evening. Thanks to all.
So